Venom is a movie produced by Sony Pictures, and it's Sony's attempt to take an iconic Spider-Man villain and make him into an anti-hero. Before I get into this review, let me make it clear that this movie has nothing to do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Marvel Studios had no involvement with this, and it isn't tied to the other Marvel movies like Iron Man, Captain America, or Guardians of the Galaxy. I went into this movie with really low expectations, given all the critics' tweets throughout the week and reviews that I've seen. I can't say that I hated this movie as much as the critics did, nor can I say that this movie is an underrated masterpiece. The beginning of this movie is kind of a slog to get through. Like, the first 45 minutes of this movie is purely set up, and I found it painfully boring. The movie introduces the Life Foundation and its founder, and he's basically the main villain of this movie. He's played by Riz Ahmed. His name, the character's name in the movie is Carlton Drake. Basically, he was experimenting throughout the movie with the symbiotes that was basically found on the rocket, one of his rockets that his company sent into space. And he's basically experimenting with the symbiotes and stuff, and he gives that speech throughout the movie where he's like, basically, Earth's resources has kind of dried up or whatever. It's like overpopulation, and he's, throughout the movie, he's like, the symbiotes, the fusion between symbiotes and human beings. That's basically the next step in evolution and all that crap. I found him as a villain. I thought he was very dry, much like most of the characters in this movie. They're very poorly written. I thought that he was a very typical villain, and his whole evil plot or whatever, I thought was very typical. It's very run of the mill. Like, there wasn't really anything interesting there wasn't anything interesting about his character or anything new regarding like the way that they kind of set up the evil plan or evil plot with this villain. And later on in the movie, and this really isn't a spoiler because it's in the trailer, but he also becomes Riot. He ends up bonding with the other symbiote, and he ends up becoming Riot at the end of the movie. By the end of the movie. And I'll get into the fight between Venom and Riot later, but really I can say just overall the characters, they were really all flat, all with the exception of Eddie Brock, who's played by Tom Hardy. I thought that Eddie Brock and Venom were basically the best characters in this movie, but that really isn't saying much because, like I said, the characters were really flat. Michelle Williams, who plays the girlfriend of Tom Hardy in this movie, I thought that she was the flattest out of all of the characters. They have no chemistry whatsoever, Michelle Williams and Tom Hardy. Tom Hardy, I didn't think, when I was looking at the trailer for this movie before the movie came out, I was kind of thinking that I wasn't really gonna like Tom Hardy's performance, and Tom Hardy's kind of a hit and miss actor for me personally because I didn't like Mad Max, but I like The Dark Knight. He played Bane in that movie. But this movie, I can say one thing, even though I said, I just mentioned how boring this movie was at the beginning of it. It's entertaining. Like, it really picks up, like, I want to say like an hour and 15 minutes in. It finally picks up and things finally get interesting once Eddie Brock ends up coming into contact with Venom. Once he gets Venom, that's when it gets interesting. That's when it actually gets funny. It gets hilarious. So this movie, if I can say one good thing about this movie, I guess, is that it's funny. That's the only thing it has really going for it, is its comedy. And I love how the trailers kind of set up Venom as being this menacing, kind of evil character, but in the movie he's not really menacing. He's not frightening at all. He's more comedic than he is frightening. Like, he's more funny than he is, this thing that you're supposed to be afraid of. I could say there were multiple times throughout this movie where it was like me and a few other people in the theater were laughing at moments in this movie that were both intended to be funny, and then there were unintentional moments that you weren't quite sure if it was meant to be funny, but we were laughing at it because it's the way it kind of goes about the way that it might have been the way that Tom Hardy was basically his performance as Eddie Brock during some of the scenes, especially when he first gets the symbiote. I mean, I can say this that the comedy really works for it. And if they were trying to go the Deadpool route and kind of make it a dark comedy with a lot of action in it, it kind of succeeds on that front a bit. But other than that, I think that's like the only bright spot in this movie is really Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock, and sort of the relationship between Venom and Tom Hardy. I mean, Eddie Brock, his character, the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom, that works, but it's not enough there. I mean, by the time he gets Venom, it's like an hour and some change in the movie or whatever. And I'm happy that we got to see a lot of Venom in this movie because there were kind of rumors that there wasn't going to be a lot of Venom in this movie. He was only going to show up, like there was that rumor that he was only going to show up for like 15 minutes or whatever. And we got quite a few scenes with Venom in it, and quite a few scenes with Eddie Brock being chased and being attacked, and the Venom symbiote basically protecting him. And we got a few cool scenes here and there, but a lot of the trailers kind of showed you a lot of the, like, within the trailers they showed you all of the cool scenes, like the majority of it. But I could say honestly that really the comedy and the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom are kind of the strongest points in this movie, because like I said earlier, the plot is kind of run of the mill, the villain is kind of run of the mill. The CGI, I can say that at least Venom looks better than he did in Spider-Man 3. For those of you guys who don't remember, Venom first appeared in Spider-Man 3, played by, I can't remember the guy's name, but I think it's like Topher Grace or whatever. And I can say this, that at least Tom Hardy did a better job than Topher Grace. I think, like, other than the things that I've said already about the comedy and the relationship between the two characters, between Eddie Brock and Venom, that's the only good thing I can really say, because like the CGI on Venom looks good, but that third act is it was just a mess. Like the third act fight between Venom and Riot, and this isn't a spoiler because honestly it's in the trailer. That third act fight was literally just looking at, like, it was literally like looking at two CGI puddles just duking it out. Like there was moments throughout that final fight where it's like, what am I looking at? It had that Transformers effect where like you couldn't really understand, you really couldn't really kind of make out what was going on. It was just two CGI blobs going at it, and it doesn't help that both of these characters, because Venom is black and then Riot is kind of gray, they kind of mesh together, so they're not really distinguishable. And especially since it all takes place at night, well, that final fight anyway takes place at night, so it really wasn't a good final act. And honestly, it's better. It's almost better than what I would have expected, I guess. Given the reviews, like I said earlier, given all of the negative reviews and tweets that I've seen. But to be honest, it's not a very great movie. I wouldn't say that it's worse than Green Lantern. I wouldn't even put it above Fan Four Stick or the Fantastic Four reboot, if you want to call it that. I wouldn't put it above Fantastic Four reboot, because I think I like the Fantastic Four reboot just a bit more than this movie, because I felt like that movie had a lot more going for it. At least like I kind of like the characters more in Fantastic Four than in this movie. But yeah, I think I've pretty much covered all I can really say about this movie. I think that the general audience might actually like this movie, and I can honestly see this movie doing well. So far, I'm reading that Venom has set a record of 10 million, and this is opening weekend. So I think this movie's gonna do well, and if this movie does well, they're gonna do a sequel, and then Sony is planning on doing other other movies based on Spider-Man characters and stuff like that in the future. Honestly, I hope for the next movie if there is a next movie, that they can get better writers, because honestly the writing isn't very good. They need to work on the pacing. They need to work on, because I've seen in a lot of reviews, a lot of reviewers saying that it's kind of, the tone is everywhere. It's kind of tonally confused. It doesn't know if it wants to be funny or it wants to be serious or whatever. I would say that it kind of meshes. I would kind of disagree with that just a little bit, even though, like I said, there were moments where it's unintentionally funny. But yeah, if I had to give Venom a score, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. But for the general audience, this movie might actually resonate with them. It might actually click with a lot of the general audience, especially if they're not like fans of. If they're fans of Spider-Man, but they're not like fans of the comics, they don't really know anything about Venom, about this character, then they'll probably like this movie a lot more than those of us that know about Venom. Like, we know about Venom as the character who's a villain, who's traditionally a villain, and he's traditionally a Spider-Man villain. And they tried to make it work without Spider-Man, and it probably would have been better if they would have had Spider-Man in there, and they would have had Tom Holland to kind of play off of. But unfortunately, that wasn't the case. But let me know what you guys think about Venom if you've seen it. Like the video, subscribe if you enjoyed listening to this review. Thank you guys for watching. I'm out of here. Peace.